chamber. Keeping to times is important. There is flexibility with some sessions on questions and so on. They do tend to be a matter for the chair of every particular session, but if my honourable friend wanted to raise this again with the chair of the Procedure Committee, then it might be appropriate that they look at it further and see if there's any more that we need to do.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I wish you and the whole House a very Merry Christmas. Now, the government has taken over £4 billion over the last 2 decades out of the mine workers' pension scheme, yet they have not paid a single penny in. Can I ask for an urgent debate in government time to discuss this unfair surplus sharing arrangement and how we can get a better deal for miners and their families?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this point. As I recall from my time as an Energy Minister, there was a very clearly agreed sharing arrangement where the government undertook to underwrite certain returns for mine workers, in return for which, should there be surpluses, that some of that would go back to the taxpayer. I believe that that's the point that she's alluding to, but we do have work and pensions questions on the first day back on the 7th of January, and I encourage her to raise it directly with ministers there.
Warman.
Speaker, further to the questions raised by the Honourable Members for Wells and for Wellingborough, I wonder if the Honourable Lady agrees with me that we lost a very important debate last night on mental health first aid because of an SO24 that was apparently very popular, but then in fact ran short because there weren't that many people that wanted to speak in it. I wonder if she agrees with me that the Procedure Committee should specifically look at whether the SO24 is functioning as it was intended and indeed in the interests of our constituents.
Well, I certainly share my honourable friend's concern, and I would encourage all of those who have questions about how some of the procedures in this place work to please raise them with members of the Procedure Committee who may be willing to take this up further and look into it.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and all the staff of the House. This question has been raised already, but I'd like some clarity from the Leader of the House. Many of my constituents are currently stuck at Gatwick because of the flying of illegal drones in the airspace. So I wonder if we could have an urgent debate or statement from the government on the regulations around drones and particularly around airspace and the criminal sanctions that go along with illegally flying drones that could endanger many hundreds of lives, particularly on this anniversary of the disaster across Lockerbie 30 years ago. And I wonder if she would join me in congratulating LNER, a train company in public ownership, who are offering my constituents free travel back to Edinburgh today if they're caught up at Gatwick.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that his local train company is offering a solution. It is awful for passengers who are stuck trying to get on a plane or indeed off one or land at Gatwick. It's absolutely unacceptable. The government passed legislation very swiftly to deal with the criminal sanction of those who would seek to interfere with a plane using a drone, and now there are sentences of up to 5 years and unlimited fines for such activities. But he's absolutely right to point out we do need to do more. There is a consultation underway, and the government is committed to making sure that whilst drones have fabulous opportunities for things like delivering medicines or aid or whatever it might be, all sorts of commercial uses, on the other hand we've got to make sure that the regulation keeps up.
Jonathan Edwards.
Leader of the House will have heard my point of order in relation to the PricewaterhouseCoopers report into the costings of HS2. Can she arrange for me to have an early Christmas present and for the promises made to me in answer to written parliamentary question 188155 is honoured?
Well, I did hear the honourable gentleman's point of order, and he will no doubt be aware that many of my constituents would agree with his concerns. I will certainly look at what can be done and whether we would be able to provide a debate.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following the launch of its alcohol charter, the Drugs, Alcohol and Justice Group which I co-chair, wrote to the relevant minister, who's actually now in the chamber, seeking a meeting with her. But it's been several months, and I wonder perhaps if the Leader of the House could have a kindly word with the minister to remind her of the group's request.
Well, the honourable lady's timing was perfect, and I can tell her that my honourable friend is saying, I didn't know anything about it, and she'd be delighted to meet with her.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Being elected to this place is one of the proudest moments of my life, but I was embarrassed to be a member of this place yesterday with the antics that went on in the chamber. And, of course, we have to treat each other with respect, but actually I wish that members who'd showed a similar sense of outrage and urgency when the Cox report had been published as they did yesterday. I'm very pleased that we are going to be having a debate on the first day back in the new year, but will there be a votable motion as a result of that debate so we can actually implement the procedures necessary to investigate and deal with these historical allegations?
Yes, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point. Specifically, the Standards Committee has brought forward its own review of what steps can be urgently taken to provide more lay member input on things like voting and on assessing any findings against members of this place. And so those are their initial suggestions for steps we can urgently take. There will be a motion, I'm just reviewing it now, and specifically what I'm keen to make sure is that the complainant's confidentiality, which was such a core point of all the work we did in the original setting up of the complaints procedure, is upheld. But there will be a votable motion. It will change standing orders of this House in certain small ways, but the Standards Committee are clear there's more work to do. And of course there will also be the 6-month review of the complaints procedure itself, which will begin in late January, and I'll be talking to the House more about that in due course.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in the early hours of Sunday the 9th of December, just 2 weeks ago, Chinese authorities launched a large-scale crackdown on a church in Sichuan province, arresting some 100 members as they worshipped their god. 12 members of that church are still in detention, including the pastor Wang Yi and his wife. And will the Leader of the House agree to a statement or a debate on this very pressing issue?
The Honourable Gentleman raises a very serious issue about the rights of everyone to be able to freely practice their religion. He often raises such issues, and he's absolutely right to do so. This whole House deplores any type of discrimination against anyone for their religious views. I do encourage him to seek an adjournment debate so that he can raise the matter directly with ministers.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I wish you a happy Christmas along with all the staff. To the Leader of the House, I placed a written question about the Civil Nuclear Constabulary's pension predicament, and they've been waiting an equality impact assessment that was undertaken by the Treasury and then passed to BEIS. In their answer, BEIS tell me that they can't release it yet until all policy discussions on this matter are complete. Could you obtain a statement as to why we are awaiting policy decisions when the request was for the publication of the impact assessment?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman will appreciate I'm not cited on his question, so I'm not aware of exactly what the position is. We do have business questions on Tuesday, the 8th of January. I encourage him to raise it directly with ministers then.
Stephen Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are many people, both in the House, across parties and outside, who have real concerns around some elements of policing across the United Kingdom, with crime going up, burglary, knife crime and much more. I have put forward an early day motion signed by 47 MPs across party demanding that the government implement a police royal commission, first one for 50 years. So the whole issue of policing and resourcing for the 21st century can be done independently, robustly and properly. Will the Leader of the House advise me the best way for me to be able to persuade the government to actually implement that police royal commission?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this issue, and in particular it gives me the opportunity to pay tribute to all the amazing work of our police forces right across the United Kingdom, and particularly at Christmas, when very often they don't get to eat their Christmas lunch whilst the rest of us do. So the Honourable Gentleman asks about a Royal Commission. He will be aware that we have just had the police funding review statement in this place, and that we have set out our serious violence strategy as well as an offensive weapons bill. So this government is taking every possible step to try to address the challenge of changing criminal behaviour, the rise in county lines, knife crime, moped crime and so on. And we are dealing with those issues, and so it is not considered necessary to have that Royal Commission that he is asking for.
Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Although we're all preparing for Christmas, I'm sure we're all looking forward to that period over we get a bit of respite. We have to remember that many people this time of year is a time of isolation, increased mental health problems and indeed suicide. So would the Leader of the House consider calling a debate in government time on the issue of suicide prevention, but also we should pay tribute to the Think Again campaign in Glasgow, which is calling for permanently staffed emergency lifeline telephones to be installed along the River Clyde, and to the Spears family in my constituency who suffered the tragic loss of their son Christopher in the River Clyde 2 years ago and are fighting to ensure better life-saving measures on the banks of the River Clyde. Awareness of mental health issues is improving, but that does not reduce the need for practical measures to reach out to people with suicidal thoughts at their most dire moment of need. The hard work of bereaved families who have built up the Think Again campaign with the help of Glasgow community activist Stephen Shaw over several years, and their efforts to raise awareness of the issue by Duncan and Margaret Spears, have turned their own unimaginable losses into hope. The ambition of the Think Again campaign is such that when these measures are introduced in Glasgow, they plan to expand the campaign to include other cities across the UK. This work represents Glasgow at its best, and I hope that the Leader of the House and Glasgow City Council can mark their wonderful efforts in that regard.
Well, I certainly join with the honourable gentleman in paying tribute to that superb work. That really does sound like a magnificent contribution to trying to alleviate the problem of poor mental health and suicide and so on, which is so vital right across the United Kingdom. He will be aware that the government is putting much more money into solving mental health problems and taking strong action. So, for example, we've committed nearly £2 million.
We will replicate existing EU free trade agreements and the same preferential effects with partner countries as far as possible, while making the technical changes needed to ensure agreements can operate in a bilateral context. We will inform Parliament and the public when agreements have been signed.
First of all, I'd like to wish you, Mr Speaker, a very Merry Christmas, and also to other members and staff. And I'd also like to do something I don't often do, which is thank the Secretary of State and his ministers and staff for organising a very helpful series of briefings, all-party briefings for members. They are very welcome and very informative. In relation to the question, the Secretary of State will know that there are 35 free trade agreements in place currently that we have as a result of our EU membership, 48 that are part